Welcome everybody to New Heart, New World. I'm Rasika Manjari and thank you so much for joining me today. Today we're going to discuss the blissful alternative. Now, as human beings, we all like variety. We like to have choices and we like to explore all different options of potentials available to us. And of course, in the Western world, there is no shortage of this variety and options. So it can range from the millions of flavors of ice cream that are available to, the choices of clothes and styles that we wear, and of course everything in between and beyond. So we do like to have choices, but ultimately what this love of variety represents is ultimately comes down to the same thing. It's that of satisfying our senses. Because ultimately our senses are gatherers of information, and we like to have the nicest information possible coming into our systems. And when we are exposed to all our different options, then we get to exercise that choice and select what comes into our consciousness and our minds, and of course resulting in our experiences. So our senses are designed to be fulfilled. That's how they interact with the world. And in fact, that is our interface with our environment and even other people. So our senses are very important. And however, even though we have many options available to us and many ways of satisfying our senses, there's one option that's rarely on offer in mainstream Western society. And that is the option of spiritual growth, or the satisfaction of our senses in ways that are not going to be harmful to us. Because unfortunately, with all of our choices, things can get a little bit out of hand, and when they do, the results can be quite disastrous in some ways. Because when our senses are overloaded, or we try to satisfy them more and more and more with what we think they want or need, then of course this can lead to the excesses that lead to disease and distress in many different ways. Because, there are limits to what our senses can handle, but however, in the context of these choices we have, somehow it's that we need more and more and more of these options to keep us happy. It's like it's never enough. We just keep wanting more. And this is the problem with a lot of the variety in our world today, is that it doesn't satisfy us at a really deep, profound level, at the level of the soul. So we can think about this in the context of our bird analogy, bird in the cage analogy, and we've spoken about this before in previous videos, but we'll just recap quickly for those who haven't heard it. But basically, it's just that we all possess a cage. We possess a bird cage in this analogy. And that bird cage comes in many different sizes, shapes, varieties, textures, and we're all busy making our bird cages look beautiful. We polish it, we clean it, and we try to compete with our neighbours as to how beautiful our bird cage looks. But one thing we tend to forget is that within that bird cage, within each of our bird cages, is a little bird. Now that bird, in the busyness of our making the cage look beautiful, often gets forgotten and doesn't even get fed, and as a result is starving most of the time. Now this cage represents our bodies. It represents our material experience. It represents our material possessions, basically life in the material world. And that bird in the cage represents our soul who needs attention and food, but however, unfortunately, is often neglected at the expense of the bird, at its expense because of the bird cage. Now, this is demonstrated, this bird in the cage analogy is clearly demonstrated in the rampant consumerism of our society today. I mean, we're educated, we're groomed to consume till we drop. And drop is often what we do. So it's actually often working against us, this need to satisfy our senses, because it's just that no matter what we do, somehow we're just never happy. And often we might think we're happy for a little while, but then that sort of soon fades, and then we need something else to distract us, or to give us the new satisfaction or the new thing it is that we're after. Now, and that's not something everyone will admit, that once they've had that prized possession, or once they've gained that sought after commodity or thing of desire, even after that, the happiness doesn't necessarily persist in a continuous and everlasting way. No, that happiness is brief and fleeting, and unfortunately doesn't stay forever. Thankfully, however, there is another way to meet the needs of our senses. Now, the senses are very open to ways that they can be satisfied, and it's up to us to make the choices to give them what they need in a way that's going to be beneficial to them and not destructive and cause harm, and not only for us but our environment and also those around us. So it's important the choices we make about what we feed to our senses. Now, as I said, there is another way to meet these needs, but and if we were told that our anxieties and all of our distresses would just dissolve away with this alternative approach, then I don't think anyone would argue about its place in the satisfying of our senses. The thing is, some of us don't even realize that there is another way. There is an alternative, and most of us think that whatever's on offer in the immediate environment, in our societal values and norms, I mean, that's all there is. However, there are things out there that are not commonly known and have the potential to uplift us to levels of happiness that we never knew existed. Now, just as a brief introduction to the alternative approach, we often think of our broader context, the world in which we live and the cosmos beyond. We often speak of it and the manifestation of it in impersonal terms. I mean, we often term the powers that be, or that higher power that we sense that exists. Many of us sense that there is some kind of a higher force or power that actually has a deep and profound influence on what we do and what goes on in the world. However, the terminology we use to describe that higher power is often very impersonal, such as, the universe is a common one. So just making it something that's out there and not personal and very distant in a way from us as human beings. However, there is actually another way to approach this view of the world and our place in it. And this forms part of the Bhakti Yoga worldview, which is the blissful alternative that I'm alluding to. Now, this alternative view of the universe is that that higher power that many of us sense influences our lives on a day-to-day basis is actually a person. And that person actually has our best interests at heart. In fact, he, or Krishna, as he's referred to in the Bhakti Yoga tradition and philosophy, is called Krishna. So, in this way, when we conceive of the forces that be that control us as being ultimately managed by a person who has likes and dislikes, and who is just like us in many ways. However, unlike us, He's the supreme person with supreme opulences, powers, intelligence, and all good qualities. Now, the Bhakti Yoga tradition tells us that this supreme person is actually the source of everything that we see around us and beyond. And we, in fact, are parts and parcels of this supreme person, Krishna. And in that way, we share characteristics of the supreme person. However, because of our material condition, because we're here in the material world and not in the spiritual world, which is where we originate from and which is where we are headed to in terms of our ultimate destination, because we are here in the material world, those divine spiritual qualities and that perfect essence of who we are as spirit souls is covered over in many situations. So we don't get to see who we really are in our true perfection. Now, Bhakti Yoga, as the blissful alternative, jogs our memories. It wakes us up because it acts as an alarm bell in a way. And I'm very happy to tell you that this alarm bell is actually a very pleasing tune. So we're designed to wake up. We're designed to be shaken out of our slumbers, because that is what the material energy represents. It represents a deep slumber that we're in, that no alarm bell in the past has been able to shake us out of. However, the alarm bell of Bhakti Yoga is so sweet and melodious and inviting that it can wake us up. It has that power and allow us to see ourselves for who we truly are. So when we choose to saturate our senses with the kinds of choices that will uplift them and will ultimately bring them to a state of true satisfaction, of a place where they're ultimately satisfied for good, for eternity, then that is where Bhakti Yoga comes in. Because Bhakti Yoga offers us those choices, those alternative ways in which to go about getting sensory gratification, because ultimately we all need it. We all need to make sure that we're not suffering unnecessarily, that we're getting our needs met, and this is actually in part enacted by the activities of our senses. So what happens is when these higher forms of sensory experience are taken in by the senses, it feeds back to the mind. And the mind starts to recognize these new experiences and start to choose them again and again and again, because it realizes that it is in its best benefit, in its for its highest good. And this is where the mind can be reprogrammed in a way that it starts to choose things that is good for it and for the rest of the body, and also ultimately with the soul. So in this way, our mind becomes our best friend, because it knows that we're feeding it with what it needs, the sensory experiences informed by a higher knowledge and a higher taste. So this becomes like a far cry from the mind that we knew, the mind full of disturbance and conflict and confusion. It's a mind that is clear and is able to think with a rational sense of purpose, and also ultimately make those decisions that is good for the human being that it belongs to. Now, this comes down to then making basic choices about what we invite into our experience through our senses. And we just need to somehow filter out those unnecessary, unwanted, and disruptive, disturbing elements that are on offer often in the Western civilized world, and that we would rather not choose for our long-term health and well-being. So this is where, again, Bhakti Yoga offers us alternatives. So ultimately, Bhakti Yoga is interested in the complete renovation of our consciousness. And it doesn't do this in a destructive way, in a sense that it doesn't bring in the bulldozers and the demolition squad. No, Bhakti Yoga brings in sanctified vegetarian food. It brings in harmonious, melodious kirtan, which is the chanting of the sacred Mahamantra to beautiful tunes in a congregational setting. It brings in fabulous festivals, and it brings in the blissful association of like-minded individuals. And in this setting, in the context of the Bhakti Yoga culture and lifestyle and practice, is where our senses start to learn how it is to experience a higher taste. And of course, the mind then begins to choose these experiences again and again, more and more, because it realizes that it's truly satisfying at all levels, not just at the sensory level, but at the level of the soul. So when our senses are happy, our mind is happy, and ultimately we are happy. Our soul is content because it is being fed and nourished with that which it was always truly meant to experience. A taste, a higher taste, the taste of love of the highest order, because it is through these experiences, through the Bhakti Yoga culture, that we experience the ultimate love, which is the connection between the individual soul and the divine soul, which is Krishna. Now, Krishna, of course, has many other names. He has infinite other names. He's commonly known as God as well. Now, it then comes down to the fact that when we connected in this way through our senses to the deep, profound teachings of Bhakti Yoga, then what happens is that instead of a pond, when we think about a pond, it's quite a shallow body of water, and when there's intense heat, that body of water shrinks and the water level of the pond reduces drastically, if not completely disappears. But if we think about an ocean in contrast, the ocean is vast in its depth and profundity, and a little bit of heat and even massive storms and floodings don't alter its water levels. The water levels remain relatively stable because it is so deep, it is so profound. And so in this way, when we're saturating our senses with the experiences of the culture of Bhakti Yoga, the culture and practice and philosophy of Bhakti Yoga, then what happens, we become like the ocean. The external happenings of our environment and our relationships no longer affect us in the way that our equilibrium is disturbed. We become more like the vast ocean than that pond. We become very stable and profound and equipoised with all occurrences in our lives. But most of all, the Bhakti Yoga lifestyle and practice connects us with love, love of the highest order. And it does this through the chanting of the Mahamantra, which can be done individually on japa beads, or it can be done in congregational settings, as discussed earlier, which is called kirtan. So let's chant the Mahamantra together now. Some of you may be familiar with it from previous videos. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So this Mahamantra is the key to connecting us with the ultimate love, the ultimate being of love, the ultimate source of love, who is Krishna, that person who influences our lives on a daily level and who ultimately has our best interests at heart. So when we connected with him, when we connected with this love, through the culture, lifestyle and practice of Bhakti Yoga, including through the chanting, the regular chanting of the Mahamantra, then that love becomes deeply established and irrevocable in terms of our relationship with the Supreme Divine. And this relationship is ultimately our key to happiness. It's the definition of happiness as human beings, because we can't seem to get that happiness anywhere else. No matter how much ice cream we eat, no matter how fabulous the clothes we wear, it just doesn't keep us happy, even if it does for a moment. So thanks again for joining me today. And if you'd like to find out more about the secrets and not so secrets of Bhakti Yoga, please visit my website at newheart-newworld.com. And I'll be making many more videos on the content that Bhakti Yoga offers in terms of the culture, lifestyle and philosophy. So stay tuned. Thanks again, and I wish you all well. Until the next video, bye for now.